into like a deep, like scholarly study of this book, the Book of Jubilees. Tonight, we're going to talk about the fingerprints, if you will, that's on the book. So, a little bit of context behind the stream tonight, picking up where we left off last night. Abraham is dying in the context of where we left off. He's an old man. He knows it. He calls his son in for the last words in the Book of Jubilees. Now, you know what the scene sounds like, in the scriptures. Deathbed scenes in Genesis are about promise, about blessing, prophecy, land, descendants, covenants. A man is really handing forward the thing that he was given, passing the torch. We're going to start off here with Genesis chapter 49. So let's pull this up here. All of a sudden, where'd it go? Okay. Things are disappearing on me here a little bit. Okay. So Genesis chapter 49. What's wrong with this? Sorry, folks. We're live here, so every once in a while we get a little bit of hiccups in the system. And by the way, speaking about hiccups in the system, let me know, guys, if my audio was cutting out a little bit. Like, I noticed, at least on my end, when Hannah was playing, it was cutting out a little bit here and there. Did you guys hear that as well? Oh, Al earlier, Al says good here to support Brother Christopher and learn more of the Book of Jubilees. Well, thank you very much, Al. Much appreciated. You guys are amazing. Heather says I did not. Okay. Well, thank you, Heather. All right. Did anybody notice that? Maud says yes, was choppy. Okay. Okay, so you noticed that. Seek the Lord says you did briefly cut out earlier. Okay. Well, yeah, please let me know if that continues. I'll just switch over to a different. I got a couple different audio systems here. Chipmunk says, I'm still getting flashing. I was okay on another stream, and a person commented that they had it too, but others didn't. All right, well, thank you for letting me know that as well, Chipmunk. Yeah, any kind of quality problems you guys run across, please let me know in the live chat. And yes, mods, Seek the Lord, if you could let me know if this continues, if it's kind of cutting out just tiny little bits here and there. If it does, I'll just switch over to the other system, and that should be more reliable. Okay. Mod says copy. You mean choppy? Is that what you mean? Seek the Lord says you got it. Okay. This other person in the live chat, I have already answered this person very clearly in the comment section a few days ago. This person is just talking about an echo chamber. I already answered this person, by the way, very, very clearly in the comment section when this person asked the very same question a few days ago. Mod says will do. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, mods. Okay, yeah, so we're going to start here. Genesis. Oh, okay. Now I think we're on track here. Thank you, Seek the Lord. I appreciate that. Please be aware, guys. Like I said, this question I've answered very, very clearly. This very same person who comes on here. Just go. That's all I got to say about that. Anyways, Genesis chapter 40. Okay, Seek the Lord says just happened again. Okay. Thank you for letting me know. So before we get right into the meat of it here, Vert said, just happened. I saw it that time. Okay. Okay, so you're talking about the audio cutting out then, right? Mod says big storms in New York. No, see, I have two different, like, if you will, audio drivers. And one is better if it doesn't cut out like this, right? The other one is not. It's harder for me to deal with. It's a little bit more generic, but it will probably be smoother. Vert Mod says yes. Okay. You know what, guys? Seeing that it's cutting out like this already in the very beginning, let me switch over. It's going to take... Thank you very much for your patience, by the way, guys. I really, really appreciate it. It's going to take less than a minute to do this. Just give me... Yeah, it should be less than a minute, okay? I'll be right back. Okay, right, so... Okay, I'm back here. So I hope this would be better. Again, let me know, guys, if it's better or worse. Either way, please let me know. Let's get into this. Genesis chapter 49. And I'm not going to read this whole thing. This is just the whole thing about the death of Jacob, verses 29 to, well... you know what? Just this one paragraph, a few verses here. Let's go through this one paragraph. It says, this is speaking of Jacob, he instructed them. Okay, so this will be in the context of his sons on his deathbed, and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre, in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephron the Hittite as a burial place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is therein, which was purchased from the children of Heth. When Jacob finished charging his sons, he gathered up his feet into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. Okay, so that's the register there. Basically, bury me with my fathers, I will be gathered to my people, so to speak. So in the Book of Jubilees, Abraham calls Isaac in and talks about firewood. Firewood. So let's go over there. It's Jubilees chapter 21. Okay, I got it right here. And by the way, folks, I am reading from, in case you're wondering my source here, it is pseudepigrapha.com. That's pseudepigrapha.com. Jubilees chapter 21, verse 12, and we're going to read through to verse 16. Okay. Verse 12 says, as regards the wood of the sacrifices, beware lest you bring other wood for the altar in addition to these: cypress, bay, almond, fir, pine, cedar, savin, fig, olive, myrrh, laurel, aspolithus. And of these kinds of wood lay upon the altar under the sacrifice, such as have been tested as to their appearance, and do not lay thereon any split or dark wood, but hard and clean, without fault, a sound and new growth, and do not lay thereon old wood, for its fragrance is gone, for there is no longer fragrance in it as before. Besides these kinds of wood, there is none other that you shall place on the altar, for the fragrance is dispersed, and the smell of its fragrance goes not up to heaven. Observe this commandment and do it, my son, that you may be upright in all your deeds. And at all times be clean in your body, and wash yourself with water before you approach the to offer on the altar. Wash your hands and your feet before you draw near to the altar. And when you are done sacrificing, wash again your hands and your feet. Okay, so which woods you may burn on the altar is basically what Abraham is talking about here. This is basically his last words, his deathbed kind of instructions, passing the torch. So it's not a principle about wood, it's a list. He gives a literal list: cypress, cedar, olive, myrrh, laurel, juniper. Some translations say juniper. So he named them individually on a dying man's lips as the last thing that he has to say to his son. Now, think about who on earth cares about that. Like, you think about last words that a person may say, as they're dying. Why does it have this in the Book of Jubilees? Ordinary devout people really wouldn't be thinking about this kind of stuff. You wouldn't think of, you wouldn't expect it anyways. Farmers nowadays, you wouldn't be thinking about farmers talking about, these kind of things. Merchants, not soldiers. No, kings do not lie awake worrying about laurel versus juniper. One kind of person cares about that, and that is how we're going to find out who wrote this book. Because this is really extra strange to have something like this in it. Would Abraham really say that? So the Book of Jubilees is by definition an anonymous document. The author does not sign his name, and a set of techniques for catching him is all really what we have. So tonight we're going to talk about the fingerprints. Okay? If you're new here, what we do here is study the scriptures the way that it actually was written to the best of our ability. We have to look into the evidence that we have, the manuscripts, the translations, the variants, the text inside the canon, the text outside it, and how confident the evidence really lets us be. So we have a standing promise, unchanged. Is this book scripture? Should it be in, quote unquote, the Bible, if you're into Bible canons? We're not going to get into that tonight. That's for later on. That's in a later on episode of this series. I'll tell you which part is evidence and which part is simply opinion. Tonight is about the method. How do we know who wrote this book? How do we know when exactly it was written? We spoke about some of this last night. If you ever watch only, one episode of this whole series, this episode is one of the most important ones, because knowing how this is done and knowing how we come to these conclusions is very, very important. Everything else we do is a fact about an old book. Tonight, we're going to talk about the skill that outlives the book. Mod says very smooth now. Thank you very much, Mods. I appreciate that. Yeah, let me know, guys. Have you, in the past several minutes, have you noticed any cutting out of the audio? We had that kind of problem earlier here, so please let me know. How does it sound here in the past several minutes since we did the switch? Yeah, so last night we ended at the critical thinking question, and we talked about the solution to it. 2 phases come out of it that we're going to use for real tonight. So let me put them back on the table. Remember, we spoke about the terminus post quem, and that's the limit after which, and the earliest a thing can be. And then there's the terminus antequem, the limit before which, the latest it can be. Seek the Lord says, sounds great. Well, thank you very much, Seek the Lord. I appreciate that. Well, it's good to know. This system is got a better quality, or at least, it's more reliable compared to the other system. Thanks again, guys. I really appreciate that. And if it ever happens again, let me know, please. Yeah, so we have these two Latin terms. You take the latest of your quote-unquote afters and the earliest of your befores, and what's left in between is your window. And the sting in the tail, which some of you were still arguing about, basically, or some people were still arguing about, is that the manuscript itself, the hard copy that we have in our hands, was really the least useful fact in the list. Okay? You might say, like, for example, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Book of Enoch, it was written, this copy was written in this particular date. Well, that doesn't mean it's the original copy, right? That's the least important thing that a historian or paleographer or scholar would look at in dating a book. The physical object, it just tells you when somebody made a copy. Nothing about when the actual text was written, except that it was earlier. That's all. Hard evidence and useful evidence are not the same thing. So there are different levels or different qualities of evidence. We have good evidence, good quality evidence, and not so good quality evidence. So I'm going to hand you a real quote-unquote terminus antequem for the Book of Jubilees, out of a document that spent about 1,000 years in a storeroom in Cairo. So some of you may have heard of this document before. Others may not have. But here's the actual problem. We have a book that will not tell us who wrote it. And notice, it's not that he's being coy. He can't. The entire conceit requires the author to be invisible. The book is an angel dictating to Moses on Sinai. That's the claim. There's no room anywhere in the frame for a 2nd century Judean with a name and an address. His anonymity isn't modest. It's structural. So we have no signature, no date, no colophon. What we have, we actually got to work with. So this represents some of the stuff we're talking about. Anonymous book, 3 questions. 3 questions. And we'll take them one by one here. Number 1, what does he care about? What does the author care about? That tells us his profession. Number 2, what is he afraid of? That tells us his decade. When was it written? Number 3, who quotes him? And that tells us his ceiling, the latest he can possibly be. So, we've got question 1, question 2, and question 3. So let's go back to the drawing board, so to speak. Back to Jubilees chapter 21, Abraham's last words. And it isn't only the wood. Look at what else is in that speech. Which parts of the animal go on the altar, and in what order? How is the blood handled? The salt, washing hands and feet before and after. That is not a man giving his son a blessing. That is a man giving his son a procedure. And an honest complication while we're here, a couple of those tree names, if you will, are genuinely uncertain in the Ge'ez. Okay? The Ge'ez is the original, well, I shouldn't say original, it's from the ancient, the oldest manuscripts in the Ethiopian copy of the Ethiopian Book of Enoch. So, because those words are uncertain in Ge'ez, those translations disagree about the identifications and even about how many there are. Doesn't touch the argument, but you should hear it anyways. So the question, who cares about this? A priest. A priest would care about this. A priest would care about this desperately, because a priest is a man who has to know on the day, in the moment, standing at the altar with a congregation watching and an animal waiting, which wood is acceptable, which wood is not acceptable. It's his job. It's the thing that would keep him awake, so to speak, at 3 a.m. That's not a theological argument. That is a fingerprint. And let's be precise about what kind of evidence this is, because it's a good example of something that gets misused. I'm not saying the book mentions priests, therefore a priest wrote it. That would be worthless. Now, plenty of people write about priests. Doesn't mean a priest wrote it. I'm saying something narrower. He cannot stop himself. He's writing a deathbed scene, the emotional peak of the patriarch's life, and what comes out of the man's mouth is altar procedure. That's not a choice about content. You can look at that as a leak in the evidence, leak of evidence, that would be. So, festival dates. Not that the festivals, in this context is the biggest thing, exactly. But here's the thing: like when exactly do the festivals fall? To what day? And precisely what day? What goes wrong if you're off by one? Okay? And this is what the Book of Jubilees talks about. We'll go to Jubilees, and let's go over there. We'll go to Jubilees chapter 32. And let's go to let's start with verse 1, put it in some context here. It says, "And he abode that night at Bethel, and Levi dreamed that they had ordained and made him the priest of the Most High God, him and his sons forever. And he awoke from his sleep and blessed the Lord. And Jacob rose early in the morning on the 14th day of this month, and he gave a tithe of all that came with him, both of men and cattle, both of gold and every vessel and garment. He gave tithes of all. And in those days, Rachel became pregnant with her son Benjamin. And Jacob counted his sons from him upwards, and Levi fell to the portion of the Lord. And his father clothed him in the garments of the priesthood and filled his hands." So here we got Jacob's tithes. And then the text stops to tell you how the tithe was counted. All right, so if we go to another chapter of Jubilees, this would be chapter 3. Chapter 3 takes the laws of purification after childbirth and derives them out of the story of the Garden of Eden. So, not really going to get into that much tonight here, but this is where we are. Jubilees chapter 3. Later on, we'll talk about that. Probably be closer to the weekend by the time we get to that particular subject. This man reads the second chapter of Genesis, the author of Jubilees we're talking about, and he sees Leviticus chapter 12 and Levi, and the tribe of Levi gets extraordinary treatment in this book. Levi is elevated. Levi is installed. Levi's line gets the priesthood permanently by the word of God, by the decree of the Most High, and that elevation is tied directly to an act of violence in defense of the boundary between Israel and everyone else. So we'll do that properly later, and it's an uncomfortable passage, and I'm not going to soften it when we get there. The sacrificial mechanics of it all is really, really interesting. Festival calculation, tithing procedure, purity law, and the exaltation of the priestly tribe. I'd say, we can be about as confident this man was a priest as we can be about, we can very confident. I always don't like to say 100% anything, because we don't know everything. There's a lot of things that can come into play that we've never thought about. So, but even though, we can say that this author was probably a priest. It isn't proof. Nothing tonight is necessarily proof, but it's the kind of convergence that would satisfy a reasonable person in any other field. If you love to study scripture, if you love to get into this kind of stuff, it's the kind of stuff you would love to mull over. If a detective told you the suspect was a chef because he cared about knife angles and oven temperatures and which cut goes with which sauce, you wouldn't call that a leap in logic, would you? You'd call that fairly good conclusion. Now, the other half of the sentence, so to speak, it matters just as much. We cannot name him. People have tried. There's a recurring suggestion that he was a figure the Dead Sea Scroll community called the teacher of righteousness. Some people believe that teacher of righteousness was the one who actually wrote the Book of Jubilees, the founder of the Qumran community, who was also conveniently anonymous too. Two anonymous second century priests, wouldn't it be tidy if they were, the same man? But there's no real good evidence for that, though. So it's an attractive guess, if you will, but it's been made by serious people, and it's an estimation. It's a speculative column, if you will, and so we'll leave it there where it belongs. So here's honestly where we stand after the detective work on the Book of Jubilees. We can pretty much, we can be fairly certain of his profession. We have a strong sense of his preoccupations, and we will very shortly have his decade, within a range anyways. We'll never know his name, or his town per se, but we can narrow it down a fair amount, or whether what his age was and all that kind of stuff. So he's going to remain a shape basically behind a curtain for for as long as this book is around, basically. And so this is not a failure of the method. That's the method. That's the method telling you the truth about its own limits, which honestly is the most trustworthy thing a method can do. So when somebody hands you a name for this book, and you're sure enough will come across it if you haven't already, there's always somebody doing a video somewhere promising you that they know for sure, who wrote the book. But now you know enough to ask them one question. What evidence supports that? What evidence do you have to support that claim? As far as we can see, there is not any evidence. So we know we can pretty much have a good guesstimation as to what he was. Now, when was this written? And how do we know? This is where it really gets interesting, because we're going to do it, the way that you do it in the unsigned letter found in any attic, if you will. Not by trusting what it says about itself, because there's a lot of texts that claim a lot of things of itself. We got to look deeper than that. We got to extract a date from it by catching what it can't help saying about itself. Because writers leak. Writers, they leak evidence, if you will. You reach for an example, and the example is from your own life, is from your own decade, is from your own culture. You describe a danger, and it's the danger outside your own window. Nobody can fully imagine their way out of their own century, so to speak, out of your own culture that you've been raised in. At least it's not very easily done. So the writer of the Book of Jubilees, the author, was very careful. But he was not careful enough. So what pieces of evidence did he leave? What did he leave here that would give us some evidence as to what? Okay. Yes, those of you in the live chat, it's a sad thing that I always have to say this, and but if you come on the live stream here and you get in the live chat, or if you get in the comment section, do understand that you have agreed to be civil and respectful. These are the guidelines of the channel. If you come on here, this is a covenant that you've made with me and with everyone behind me. Okay? You are civil. You have made a covenant with us. You've made a covenant with this community here to be civil and respectful, not to attack any person personally. If you're going to attack something, attack the arguments, not the person, and also to provide evidence. It's three simple rules. Be civil and respectful. Don't attack the person. If you're going to attack anything, attack just the argument that's made, the claim that's made, and provide evidence. Pretty simple as that. If you don't honor the agreement that you made, if you don't honor the covenant that you made, then you can expect to receive the just you'll reap what you sow, basically. All right, so back to the Book of Jubilees. The principle is simple, and it's a bit uncomfortable once you notice it about yourself. Nobody can fully really imagine their way out of their own culture, their own time, their own mindset. You reach for an example, and the example comes from your life. Because it's the way that you think. It's nature and nurture. You describe a danger, the danger is outside your window. You write about a villain, and it sounds like somebody you actually know, or a movie that you saw, or a song that you heard about. So when a writer sets a story 1,000 years in the past, and then fills it with anxieties of his own decade, historians call that an anachronism. And an anachronism is dateable. But before I use that tool, I want to show you where that tool can break. Because a tool can't break if you truly understand how to use it. If you truly understand, if you truly have understanding of it. Let me see here. Eric in the live chat. Hey, if you could please keep things on topic, that'd be appreciated. Eric says, good evening. Good evening, Eric. Welcome and blessings to you. Thank you, Seek the Lord. Yes, direct your questions to Christopher Hughes at Christopher Enoch. Make it easier to find. Exactly. Thank you very much, Seek the Lord. Again, I appreciate that. Here's a little bit of an illustration. So, anachronism finds three ways that it can fail. Number one, interpolation. Suppose a later scribe added a sentence, copied the book, thought of something, wrote it in, and 300 years on, nobody can see the difference. Nobody can see the seam, if you will, between the original text and the interpolation. Now, your anachronisms dates the edition, not the book. That's not hypothetical. It happens across ancient literature constantly, which is why you never want your case resting on one verse. You want the evidence spread across the whole work in places a scribe wouldn't have bothered touching. Like multiple attestation, even extra biblical, all that kind of stuff. You want it going right across the board. And then we have number two, the recurring problem. If the thing your author is upset about happened in more than one period, your anachronism doesn't pin a decade, it pins a range. Sometimes a very wide one. And I'm going to be very straight here. This one bites on my strongest piece of evidence tonight. I'll show you exactly where in just a few minutes here. Failure 3, circularity. And this is the objection somebody might be thinking about right now. You might be typing a live chat or a comment later. So you might say, aren't you dating the book? Aren't you dating the book from the, you're deciding that it's from the 160s, and then you're reading the 160s into it, and then using that to prove that it's from the 160s. Like the circular reasoning. And you might ask that question. Yeah, that's a fair question. The way out of that circle is independent attestation, multiple attestation. I don't need Jubilees to tell you there was a gymnasium in Jerusalem. First Maccabees says so. Second Maccabees says so. Different author, different source, different agenda. I don't need Jubilees to tell me that, that adult Jewish man were or adult Jewish men were reversing their circumcisions in that day. First Maccabees tells us this. And Greek and Roman medical writers also attest to that as well. Men who had no stake in this argument whatsoever and were simply describing a surgical procedure they'd performed. I don't need Jubilees to tell me circumcision was outlawed in 167. First Maccabees, Second Maccabees, and Josephus all say so. And Daniel 11 alludes to the same crisis in code, if you will. So the crisis is established without the Book of Jubilees. And then separately we ask, does Jubilees look like it was written into that crisis? That's not a circle. That's two independent lines meeting. Could I still be, overfitting, if you will? Could I be finding 167 in a book because that's what I went looking for, like confirmation bias? But that's a real risk, and we're not going to pretend that it doesn't exist, which is why the test is never does one verse fit. It's the multiple attestation thing. The test is whether several independent features point to the same window without being bent to get there. I think it's worth noting a lot of people think, for example, in the New Testament, a lot of people think that all four Gospels are four independent writers. Therefore, if three of the four Gospels say it, it's multiple attestation. Not so fast, because we have a lot of evidence that one copied another. Matthew copied Mark. Luke copied Mark. Perhaps even Luke copied Matthew too. Depending on which scholar you talk to, depending on which way you want to look at it. But if Mark, like we were talking about this the other night, we have Mark talking about the abomination of desolation and Matthew talking about the abomination of desolation. That is not multiple attestation. That's a single independent source. That's Mark, and Matthew just copied him over. So in the same way here with the Book of Jubilees, the test is whether several independent features point at the same window without being bent to get there. You can say, one clue is a coincidence, but three clues pointing the same way is not just a coincidence. It's a fairly good argument. So let's go to Jubilees, and we'll go to chapter 15. Okay, I'm going to start with verse 25. It says, this law is the law for the generations forever, and there is no circumcision of the days, and no omission of one day out of the 8 days, for it is an eternal ordinance, ordained and written on the heavenly tablets. And every one that is born, the flesh of whose foreskin is not circumcised on the 8th day, belongs not to the children of the covenant which the Lord made with Abraham, but to the children of destruction. Nor is there, moreover, any sign on him that he is the Lord's, but he is destined to be destroyed and slain from the earth, and to be rooted out of the earth, for he has broken the covenant of the Lord our God. So here we got circumcision, of course, in this book. In this book, it's not a sign, it's an ontology. It's engraved on the heavenly tablets. According to this book, it's eternal. Anyone not circumcised on the 8th day simply isn't of the covenant, according to this. The text says he belongs to destruction. And then verse 27 says, "For all the angels of the presence and all the angels of sanctification have been so created from the day of their creation, and before the angels of the presence and the angels of sanctification, he has sanctified Israel, that they should be with him and with his holy angels." So here, like the highest orders of angels were created already circumcised according to this book. This is not a rite that Israel performs. It's a feature of the architecture of heaven, and Israel is matching it. Let's go down to verse 33 and verse 34. It says, "And now I announce unto you that the children of Israel will not keep true to this ordinance, and they will not circumcise their sons according to all this law. For in the flesh of their circumcision they will omit this circumcision of their sons, and all of them, sons of Beliar." Notice, this is a good example, folks. I say this every once in a while when we come across this name Belial. Typically in the canonical scriptures and in most translations, you'll see it as Belial. But here's a variation of it. I always say Belial. It's two different variations of it. It's the same name. By the way, I do understand that this is where we get our word liar from. It simply means worthless. Sons of worthlessness. Sons of Beliar will leave their sons uncircumcised as they were born. And there will be great wrath from the Lord against the children of Israel, because they have forsaken his covenant and turned aside from his word and provoked and blasphemed, inasmuch as they do not observe the ordinance of this law. For they have treated their members like Gentiles, so that they may be removed and rooted out of the land. And there will no more be pardon or forgiveness unto them, so that there should be forgiveness and pardon for all the sin of this eternal error. Pretty serious stuff, folks. This is like, that almost puts like the unpardonable sin on it. So, I mean, this is very serious condemnation. He's condemning the Israelites who will not circumcise their sons, who leave them as they were born, who make themselves like the Gentiles. So let me just be clear about something here. You'll hear elsewhere, this passage is not primarily about grown men reversing the procedure. That's the thing in 1 Maccabees chapter 1. And it's real and it's horrible, for lack of a better word. But it's a different act. Jubilees 15 is about fathers not doing it to their sons. And now watch what that fits. So we go to Maccabees, First Maccabees, and we go to chapter 1 and verse 48. It says, "And that they should leave their sons uncircumcised, that they should make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profanation." So in 167 BC, the decree makes it circumcision illegal, basically. And then we scroll down a little bit to verse 60 and 61. It says, they put to death women who had circumcised their children according to the commandment. They hung their babies around their necks and their houses, and those who had circumcised them. So here, First Maccabees says plainly that women who did it anyway were put to death with their children. So for a period of years in Jerusalem, there are Jewish boys growing up uncircumcised, some because their families were terrified, and some because their families had quietly decided it no longer mattered. This is precisely, exactly the situation this passage is talking about. And a few more passages to go to in Jubilees. So let's do failure 2. Remember that graphic that I just put up there, the different failures on the best clue that we have here. Is this only possible in the 160s BC? No, it's not. Jews neglecting circumcision was not unique to that decade and that decade alone. If you go to 1 Corinthians, go forward, a couple hundred years, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and we go to verse 18. So this was written in the 1st century AD. Was anyone called having been circumcised? Let him become uncircumcised. Has anyone been called in uncircumcision? Let him not be circumcised. So in this verse, Paul is telling people not to undo it more than 2 centuries later. And there are later Roman restrictions reported as well. So on its own, that passage gives you a range, not a decade. So why is this argument still strong? Not because of the passage per se, because of the company that it keeps. This is a book that is also fighting about the calendar, about intermarriage, also fighting about eating with the Gentiles, about the priesthood, obsessed with festival dates. And there's exactly one period in Jewish history where all of those are burning at the same time. In other words, we have all of these clues in this book, in the Book of Jubilees. All of this stuff is being talked about. All this stuff is being emphasized. And there's only one period in Jewish history where all of those things are happening at the same time, in the same city. That's the difference between a clue and a case. And one more thing here before we move on to the next point, because it's the same thing that the author pulled in chapter 1. He doesn't describe the crisis. He has it predicted on Sinai 13 centuries earlier, out of an angel's mouth. He's done it twice now. We'll put both passages on the screen here in just a little bit, and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. So we have the second clue that we spoke about here the other night. The popular argument is that the author of the Book of Jubilees is pretending to be a person who wrote this from the past. So let's pull this up here, the Jubilees, and we're going to go to chapter 34. I'll show you the parallel text that we were just talking about. So this whole chapter, and chapter 37 as well, in chapter 38, The whole thing is basically full of these clues. In Genesis, Jacob is not a warrior. He's a herdsman, a negotiator. He wrestles with an angel. He limps. He makes peace with his brother. He weeps. He moves on it. In Jubilees, Jacob fights wars. He's a warrior. We talk about troop numbers. His sons riding out like commanders. And in chapter 38, again, I'll just kind of skim it over here. But these are the chapters here for your own reference later. Chapter 38 as well gets into all of this stuff. We got Esau breaking the peace and Jacob killing him, according to this, with an arrow, and then he subjugates Edom. None of that is in Genesis, where Esau goes off to Seir, prospers, and gets a long genealogy. So the standard argument, and it's a very popular argument, and it was the research handed down, through lots of academic circles, if you will, is that he's retrospecting the Maccabean campaigns. Judas and his brothers fought in those regions, so the fictional battles encode the real ones. Two mappings. Problem one, it fits somebody else, and arguably better. John Hyrcanus, Hasmonean ruler about 50 years later. He campaigned against Idumea. Idumea is another name for Edom or Edom, the sons of Esau. And according to Josephus, he compelled the Idumeans to be circumcised and live under the Torah. And he destroyed Shechem and the Samaritan temple in Gerizim. Now in Jubilees chapter 38, he subjugates Edom. And in Jubilees 30 is full of a celebration of the destruction of Shechem. Hubert says, Shalom, Shalom, Cuberts, welcome and blessings multiplied to you and your family. Hope you're having an awesome evening tonight. So the consensus is still 160 to 150 BC when this book was written. And most scholars don't take the Hyrcanus' date. But those are the strongest cards the late daters hold. And anyone who tells you that the Jacob material obviously points to the 160s hasn't really looked at the other hand. So here's the rule we need to keep in mind. When a piece of evidence fits two different periods roughly equally well, it isn't doing much work. It feels like evidence, it reads like evidence, but if I can tell you a persuasive story pointing at the 160s and an equally persuasive one pointing at the 110s, then that material isn't what's pinning the date. Something else is. Evidence that fits everything constrains nothing. And the second problem is worse because it doesn't weaken the argument, it removes its foundation. The whole thing assumes he invented these battles to encode his own moment. There's a good reason to think that he didn't. The same war legends, Jacob's sons against the Amorite kings, same shape, sometimes the same names, turn up in the Testament of Judah. They turn up in a Hebrew text called the Midrash if I can pronounce it correctly, Wayissa apostrophe U, Wayissa, let me just call it Wayissa, Midrash Wayissa, which is much later, but which the reference scholarship treats as preserving old material. And the standard assessment is that Jubilees and the Testament of Judah and Midrash Wayissa all appear to be drawing on an older common source, a war legend tradition that was already there. If that's right, he didn't compose them. He inherited them. He isn't witness to the tradition. He's right there. And you cannot date a man by the age of the stories he repeats, he retells. Hubert says, thank you and blessings to you and your family. Also, thank you very much, Hubert. I appreciate that. Blessings multiplied to you guys. Hope you're having an awesome, awesome evening. Yeah, so a common source is a reconstruction. Nobody has ever really held it, so to speak. So I'm not telling you that the Maccabean reading is wrong. I'm telling you that it is the weakest argument of the three. It's the one sold the hardest, though. That inversion happens a lot, and not only in ancient history. The claim repeated most confidently is very often the one that's believed the most, and also with the least underneath it as well, with the least support, the least evidence. Because unfortunately, with a lot of people, confidence is cheap, and checking the claims is expensive. Okay, so we got our third clue to the dating of the book. And we're going to be quick at this because the calendar gets a whole episode of its own later, and I will not be able to stop if I start talking about that. We won't be able to do it justice, so we'll do that in another whole live stream, another whole episode. So the seriousness of the calendar found in the Book of Jubilees is not a man really just explaining a calendar. That's a man losing an argument that he thinks is about the survival of the world. You'll hear that the calendar that he's attacking is the Greek calendar. That's not really the case. I wouldn't call it the Greek calendar. Reckoning by the moon is not just Greek. It's ancient Near Eastern, older than the Greeks. Nothing to do with them really, and in all of them, all over the Hebrew Bible as well. So calling it the Greek calendar is just his rhetorical move. Hubert says, is anyone else muted? You're not getting any. Hope everything's good there. Yeah, so you don't repeat a polemicist's framing as though it were a description. That the point is, this clue does a completely different job from the other two. It doesn't give us a decade; it gives us a world. It places this author inside the priestly circles where the calendar was a live, bitter dispute, and we know independently that those circles existed because the community at Qumran left behind calendar texts and priestly rotation schedules running on exactly his 364-day system. That's not Jubilees telling us about itself. That's a separate pile of manuscripts found in a cave agreeing with him. So look at what we got across 3 clues. Circumcision gave us a crisis. Jacob's wars gave us ambiguity, really. The calendar gave us a world, 3 pieces of evidence, 3 completely different jobs. Good historical work is almost never one knockout punch. And you talk to any good historian, they would always say there's never absolutes, really, or never certain, like 100% certainty when it comes to history. It's always what's the most likely versus what's unlikely. It's knowing what each thing, each argument actually weighs. It's knowing what each thing can carry and refusing to make it carry more. So, we do have a critical thinking. I'm doing this now, but we're gonna come back and talk a lot more about the Book of Jubilees. But I do have a critical thinking challenge for you guys. And I'm going to put this up on the screen, and I'll give you guys several minutes to work this out. And let me know what you think in the live chat. Okay. So we got tonight's challenge: 4 clues, 4 verdicts. A document claims to be the testament of a shepherd, written around 900 BC. A man wearing a belt of bronze. B, a payment in coined silver stamped with a king's head. C, a warning against sending sons to the halls of foreigners, where they strip naked to run. D, a sentence naming a war of 340 BC, present in 2 newest manuscripts, absent from the 3 oldest. The verdicts: pins a period, abroad after only, dates a later hand, dates a later hand, and useless could be any century. So you can pick one of those verdicts, match them, show your reasoning. So let me know what you guys think in the live chat. I'm going to leave this up for a few minutes, and then we're going to come back and talk about the solution to this. In the meantime, I'll put on some thinking music for you guys. Okay, guys, let's see what we got here. And yeah, let's break it down a little bit. We'll break it down a little bit here. We'll digest some of it here before we get right into the solution. So, yeah, let me know what you guys think in the live chat. This one is indeed probably one of the hardest puzzles, critical thinking challenges that we've ever put up here. Yeah, so last night was basically doing arithmetic. Tonight we'll be doing some really serious judgment. Document turns up. This is really the situation here. A document turns up. It claims to be the testament of a shepherd who lived around 900 BC. There's 4 things in the document. Number 1, he describes a man wearing a belt of bronze. Another one, he describes a payment made in coined silver stamped with the head of a king. C, he warns against sending your sons to be taught in the halls of foreigners where they strip naked to run. And D, one sentence mentions a war fought in 340 BC. And that sentence appears in 2 most recent manuscripts, but is missing from the 3 oldest. So we got 4 verdicts. We have to match them. One of them pins a period. One gives you only a broad after. One dates a later hand, not the author, and one is useless. It could be any century. So if you guys have any last-minute shots of this, feel free to put those in the live chat. All right, 4 clues, 4 verdicts. Here's how they sort. Take them from the top. A, the bronze belt, is pretty much useless. Okay, bronze belts span for centuries. It rules nothing in and nothing out. And I put it there because the most spurious anachronism arguments you'll see online are exactly this: a detail that feels period specific but really isn't. So that one really doesn't do a whole lot for us. Oh, sorry, Chipmunk has already said this. Chipmunk says A is useless, could be any century. Man, yes, you got it, Chipmunk. Chipmunk says D dates a later hand. B pins a period. C, a broad after only. Those are my guesses. I would only be guessing, says Cuberts. I will wait for the answer. This is a tough one. Wow, yeah, very much I agree, Cuberts. Don't blame me a bit on that. And Chipmunk, you're doing well, very well. Good stuff. So let's go back to it. We'll talk about this. Yeah, so yeah, A is true. Yep, A is pretty much useless. Now let's talk about B. B, the coined silver. That is a broad after and nothing more, because coined money doesn't exist anywhere before roughly the 7th century BC. So it rules out 900 BC decisively. It rules out absolutely nothing else. So, that's a real, what they call terminus post quem, doing real work. And it's still nearly useless on its own. Seek the Lord says A, broad after only. B, dates a later hand. C, useless. D, pins a period. All right. Well, thank you. Seek the Lord. Thank you. I appreciate that. And Al says this is another tough one, but I'll guess. A, useless. Could be any century. B, dates a later hand. C, pins a period. And D, a broad after only. Wow, you guys are amazing. Yeah, thank you guys. This is definitely a really tough one. I agree. So yeah, so A is useless. Yep. B is abroad after. And C now. C is, let's see, it says a warning against sending sons to the halls of foreigners where they strip naked to run. So C, the halls of foreigners where they strip naked to run, that one pins a period. That one pins a period. So Al got that one. Congratulations, Al. Chipmunk got the first one. That was awesome. And again, congratulations, Chipmunk. C pins a period because that's not a generic complaint about outsiders. It's a specific institution with a specific practice arriving in a particular region at a particular time. That's the profile of a genuine anachronism, specific, institutional, and datable. And D contains the actual year. Okay, so 340 BC. It's the only hard date that we have. So it feels like the strongest clue by a mile, but if you look where it sits, present in the two newest manuscripts, but absent from the three oldest, that's the textbook profile of an interpolation. A later hand added it. So that sentence dates the scribe, not the author. So A is the useless one, B is the broad after only, C is the one that pins a period, D dates the later hand. All right. There you have it, folks. It's amazing. Okay, well, thanks, guys, for taking a shot at that. That was awesome. You guys are amazing, as always. And yeah, awesome stuff. Good work, guys. Thanks again. So yeah, that's how interpolations are actually detected. Not by intuition and not by, well, that doesn't sound right to me, but exactly like that. You line up the witnesses and you ask which ones have it. You know, two nights here, we've been going through that. Yeah, Seek the Lord says these are challenging. They very much are. I'm going to have to, I know it's been, I'm going to have to, these are super, super tough. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Seek the Lord. I appreciate that. So the clue that feels the hardest, you know, a physical manuscript, like hard evidence is, with a specific year, is often the one doing the least work for the question. You know, it's, you know, we need to ask what the evidence dates, not how solid it feels. Right? So, like, back to this one here. We've done question 1. What does the author care about? His profession. You know, we're looking at probably a priest. We've done question 2. What's he afraid of? What's his decade? The crisis, a crisis and ambiguity and his own world, if you will. Now, question 3. This is the hard evidence. Who quotes him? Who quotes him? So there's a really interesting document that came out of a synagogue in Cairo, and it's where worn out sacred. It's called a Geniza, where worn out secret texts go, because you're not permitted to destroy anything with a divine name on it. So you put it in a room, and you keep putting things in the room. And, for about 1,000 years, if you keep doing that, in the 1890s, there was a man by the name of Solomon Schechter, I think his name would be pronounced. He brought a great deal of that room back to Cambridge. And among it was which was a text that nobody could identify. It was clearly a Hebrew text, a Jewish text. Of course, it was super old and clearly sectarian. It belonged to some group with its own rules and its own quarrels, and nobody knew which group it was because no such group was known. It was published in 1910, and it sat there as a puzzle. 50 whole years later, they found fragments of the same composition in the caves of Qumran, a medieval copy in a Cairo storeroom, and a 2,000-year-old copy in a Judean cave, the exact same text. This is what they call the Damascus document. It was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's one of the foundational rule books of that community. So he tells his readers that if they want the exact reckoning of the times, if they want the exact reckonings of the times, they should go and consult the book of the divisions of the times into their jubilees and into their weeks. He is sending his readers to look something up, which means by the time he wrote, the book already existed. It already circulated, and it already carried enough authority that, go and check it was a sufficient instruction. You don't say that about, a book that nobody's heard of. You say that about a book that people know about, that people hold authoritative. Now, he does not say explicitly the Book of Jubilees. He describes a title, and the identification with our book is held by almost everyone. The description matches this book's own self-description almost word for word. And you remember from the first episode of this series that the book calls itself the Book of the Division of the Days. So it matches the Damascus document. It is an identification. So there is a little footnote here we should talk about here before we get too far into this particular question. So the Damascus document is dated to the late 2nd or early 1st century BC. And a genuine terminus ante quem, a sealing, if you will. Jubilees is older than that document. Jubilees has to be older than the Damascus document. And it was already an authority when the Damascus document was written. And notice that that's the thing that we spoke of last night, and that was the critical thinking. That was the whole thing about the critical thinking puzzle last night. Not the manuscript, the quotation, which brings us to the question: was this man cheering for the Maccabees, or was he warning about them? The case that he's for them is easy. The book is militant. It celebrates zealous violence in defense of the boundary. It puts swords in the hands of the patriarchs who never held them, at least not in the book of Genesis anyways. It reads in places like a recruiting poster. And then there's this. We have in Jubilees chapter 50. I'll pull this up. And we go down to verse 12. It says right here, and every man who does any work thereon, or goes a journey, or tills his farm, whether in his house or any other place, and whoever lights a fire, or rides on any beast, or travels by ship on the sea, and whoever strikes or kills anything, or slaughters a beast or a bird, or whoever catches an animal or a bird or a fish, or whoever fasts or makes war on the Sabbaths. It says in verse 13, the very next verse, the man who does any of these things on the Sabbath shall die, so that the children of Israel shall observe the Sabbaths according to the commandments regarding the Sabbaths of the land, as it is written in the tablets, which he gave into my hands, that I should write out for you the laws of the seasons, and the seasons according to the division of their days. Herewith is completed the account of the division of days. So among the things forbidden on the Sabbath, making war. So remember what we read, a few nights ago, 1 Maccabees chapter 2, 1,000 Jews die in the wilderness rather than lift a hand on the Sabbath. And Mattathias and his people make a ruling, if we are attacked on the Sabbath, we fight. That was the 160s. It was famous. It was the defining legal decision of the revolt. And it's the reason the revolt survived its first year. And within roughly 15 years, a book appears saying that making war on the Sabbath is a capital offense. Now, again, we have to be careful here. I want you to, just think about this with me a little bit, because this is precisely the moment where the teacher gets to be clever, and he ends up being wrong. Is that verse a targeted rebuke of Mattathias or not? Yes or no, or maybe so. It's a striking coincidence no matter what. And it's hard to believe a man writing in that decade, in those circles, hadn't heard about that ruling. Is he taking a poke at Mattathias? Or chapter 50 is a long list of Sabbath prohibitions, and making war is one item on it, put there by a man with maximally strict views, and nobody in particular in mind. Is it just a coincidence he put that in there? I would say probably the first option is probably more like it. But, I want the word probably, or, you might say, if you lean towards the first option, you want the word lean, doing real work in that sentence, because, should we go around telling people that Jubilees condemn the Maccabees? Excuse me. Because the text doesn't say that. It says something that would condemn them for sure, which is not necessarily the same thing. The honest position is that this is a genuinely disputed question. This point is generally disputed. And it may simply not be resolvable from what survives. So, over these past 3 nights, let's be clear. This is not necessarily the be-all, end-all of, everything we say here is 100%, certain per se. But, we need to be honest in our way of judgment of these things. It's one thing to have a very high confidence in something. It's another thing to be 100% confident. 2nd century BC, we're talking here, composed in Hebrew, probably written by a priest, written in the Hellenistic crisis after the decrees of 167, comfortably before 100 BC. The specific window, 160 to 150 BC, it fits better than the alternatives. Of course, again, it's not carved anywhere. So, in regards to his stance on the Maccabees, you could say it's low confidence there. It could be speculation. Was he specifically pointing out Mattathias? The most gripping questions usually are the ones that the evidence supports the least. So, in episode 1, we read the opening of this book. God on Sinai telling Moses what Israel will do, and that is found in the first chapter. Go over there again. This is Jubilees, chapter 1, and if you go down to verse 12 again, I will hide my face from them. So we'll just read these few verses. I will hide my face from them, and I will deliver them into the hand of the Gentiles for captivity and for prey and for devouring, and I will reprove them from the midst of the land, and I will scatter them among the Gentiles, and they will forget all my law and all my commandments and all my judgments, and will go astray as to the new moons, the Sabbaths, and the festivals, jubilees, ordinances. And after this, they will turn to me from among the Gentiles with all their heart and with all their soul and with all their strength. And I will gather them from among the Gentiles, and they will seek me, so that I shall be found of them when they seek me with all their heart and with all their soul. So in other words, it says here, they will forsake the covenant. They will forget the festivals and the Sabbaths. They'll go after other nations. And then if you go to Jubilees chapter 15, again, reading verses 33 and 34, it says, "And I announce unto you that the children of Israel will not keep true to this ordinance, and they will not circumcise their sons according to all this law, for in the flesh of their circumcision they will omit this circumcision of their sons, and all of them, sons of Beliar, will leave their sons uncircumcised as they were born." Okay, so we read all of that earlier in the previous, or the next verse as well, verse 34. So in that, it claims that that's the angel, that, it's the same mountain, the same 40 days, saying Israel will not circumcise their sons, will leave them as they were born, will make themselves like Gentiles. Two passages. This is Jubilees 15 versus Jubilees chapter 1. Two passages, 2 chapters, same device. And finally, Maccabees chapter 1, verse 40. Let's go to 44. Oh, sorry, guys. Okay, so it says, "The king sent letters by the hand of messengers to Jerusalem, to the cities of Judah, that they should follow laws strange to the land, and should forbid whole burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the sanctuary, and should profane the Sabbaths and feasts, and pollute the sanctuary and those who were holy, that they should build altars and temples and shrines for idols, and should sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean animals, and that they should leave their sons uncircumcised, that they should make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profanation. That right there in Maccabees is considered to be a writing about a real decade, describing a decree that outlawed the Sabbaths, outlawed the festivals, outlawed circumcision, and required Jews to live like the Gentiles around them. Sabbaths, festivals, circumcision, assimilation into the nations, 4 items. The same 4 items in roughly the same order in a prophecy set 13 centuries early in a history of the 160s. So that's the argument. That's all of the argument. It isn't a theory about the supernatural, and it isn't an attack on anyone's faith. It's 4 items on the list twice. And a believing reader has to answer that. And I'm going to give it properly rather than, skate past it, so to speak. The answer is, of course they match. Between these two, of course they match. It was foretold, and it happened. What else can you say? Is it just a coincidence that everything matches up like that so perfectly? That is what the prophecy is, isn't it? That's coherent. There's no other option that we have. So this is not just a general warning that Israel will one day be unfaithful. You find that all through the scriptures. It isn't it isn't debatable, because you can say that it's true of every century. This is a specific list: Sabbath, festival, calendar, circumcision of the sons, adopting Gentile practice, 4 highly particular things, highly specific things, and they are vivid and they are urgent, while the author has essentially nothing to say about the Babylonians or the Persians or Rome or anything else across 1,300 years. A prophecy conspicuously well-informed about one moment and silent about all others is the kind that historians look at the hardest. You've watched the reasoning instead of just being handed a conclusion, and that was the entire point of what we're talking about tonight. Doesn't dating it to the 160s just assume prophecy is impossible? You might ask. No. It's the right question to ask, but it doesn't rest on ruling anything out in advance. It rests on the specificity that the problem that I just showed you presents, plus the vocabulary, plus the priestly preoccupations, plus the Damascus document. Taking away every argument that touches prophecy and the 2nd century date still stands on the other legs. Was the author of Jubilees an Essene? Most scholars now say something more careful, like maybe proto-Essene. The theology overlaps heavily with the Qumran community. They both had they had the Damascus document in Cairo. They had the Damascus document in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And that Damascus document pointed back to the Book of Jubilees. They both had the solar calendar, strict purity, priestly focus. But the evidence suggests that Jubilees is older than that community's formal break. He looks like part of the broader movement that they came out of, not necessarily a member of the sect itself. You might ask, why does the date even matter? Because it changes what the book is. A 2nd century document is a priceless window into a moment that we could otherwise barely see. The same words, if they were from Moses, would be a completely different object. Something to be weighed against the Torah rather than, to read alongside it. Same text, different thing entirely. You might ask, could a later scribe have added the circumcision passage? Yeah, it's a fair question. It's a good question. And it's the failure mode. The short answer is that the case doesn't rest on one passage. It rests on priestly occupations running through the whole book, the calendar polemic, the eternal sealing, if you will. You pull out chapter 15 entirely and the date barely moves. The crisis is attested without this book. First Maccabees, Second Maccabees, Josephus, Daniel, the Greek and Roman medical writers who had no stake in it at all. That's what keeps this from being a circle. Two independent lines meeting, not a circle. Two different evidence answers, different questions. Circumcision gave us a crisis. The calendar gave us a world. Jacob's wars gave us honest ambiguity. Knowing what each piece can carry and refusing to make it carry more is most of the skill. And you know what we have to do? We have to name the weakest argument before someone else does. We need to know the entire picture. We need to look at that diamond from every aspect, from every point of view. When I tell you something is strong, I try to do everything I can within my power to show you that it is strong. So, tomorrow, we keep asking the questions that we need to ask. The editor at work, 5 techniques. Once you can name them, you'll see them everywhere. A lie deleted from Abraham's life, a demon invented to take the blame, a machine that never drops a stitch. We're going to talk about Genesis chapter 12, verses 10 to 20, and then Jubilees chapter 13, verses 11 to 16. 5 techniques. Okay? We're going to talk about the Genesis Apocryphon. We'll talk about all this stuff, Lord willing, tomorrow.